We come to the first panel of the day. Our panellists are going to be exploring the opportunities and challenges for the automotive sector. So a very warm welcome to our speakers for this important discussion. We have Miyuki Takahashi, Stephen Dietz, Sebastian Cortes-Sanchez and Rohit Vadhwana. And a very warm welcome to all four of you for joining us today. I'd like to start off with you, Miyuki. Obviously, we've already heard today about the importance of Asia in this market, the growth that's going to be coming from the region. From Nissan's perspective on the trajectory of trade in the region, give us your forecast and tell us what impact the pandemic has had on trade policy.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. In 2020, all the countries around the world experienced a negative GDP due to the COVID. However, this year, 2021, I think IMF is forecasting a global growth of 6% versus 2020, and especially Asian growing market, it is projected to grow 7.5% more than the average. So I think the Asian economy is certainly coming back slowly. However, there are some, I think, unstable factors. For example, the semiconductor supply, as you well know. And since automotive industry is, our supply chain is so globally interconnected, the shortage of supply in one small country will affect and stop all the automotive factory of many, countries around the world. And in this situation, I think many countries are trying to set up their own, strategic domestic supply chain for national and economic security, and which leads to rather protective industrial and trade policy. So I think that's one of the concerns that automotive is facing. Thank you.
Rohit, I'd love to bring you in here. In this context, let's move our attention towards India. India expected to be the world's second biggest growth market from now to 2025. What are your predictions for the Indian market?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this panel discussion, and I think this is going to be very, very informative, especially from India's point of view. If I say that India is currently the fifth largest automotive market and the largest producer of two-wheelers and tractors globally. In 2010, if I put in perspective, automotive market was 5% of our GDP, while in 2020, automotive has like 7% plus in the GDP of India. In last financial year, we produced almost 26 million vehicles and exported 4 million vehicles. So Indian automotive industry is expected to reach around 300 billion USD by 2026. And the sector is one of the main job and growth creator for India. And the progress is expected to continue in the same way. So I see, a lot of opportunity within India domestic market as well as for the investors and collaborators in automotive sector for India.
Rohit, thank you. Sebastian, I'd love to bring you in at this point. Looking at the wider Asian market and particularly economic integration, give us a brief overview of how you see that integration working and happening.
Correct. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak today. Like Miyuki mentioned, a lot of countries right now are moving to nationalize and incorporate the supply chains domestically. But Asia has remarkably been able to expand economic integration and put in place a series of different types of trade agreements and economic integration initiatives that will likely boost and, if not enable, the integration of supply chains within the region. And there's three that I would like to briefly highlight. The first one is the CPTPP, which I'm sure we're going to discuss a bit later, which is an agreement between a series of ambitious countries within the region that really deepens commitments and strengthens trade between their partners, not just in tariffs, but in some of the behind the border barriers that we're mentioning today. So we're talking about standards, homologation requirements that I think could address some obstacles to trade within Asia. And I think the UK will have a strategic role by joining it. And the second one that I would like to highlight is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. It has 15 members. India was a member left, but it can join at any other point. And that actually includes some of the less developed economies that kind of integrate or meet CPTPP rules. So you have countries like Malaysia, like Indonesia, like Thailand, which are large automotive markets, can be further integrated into the region through an agreement like RCEP.
Stephen, I want to bring you in here. Where does Australia fit into this jigsaw puzzle?
Thanks, Cassie, and thanks so much for the invitation to speak this morning. It's a really timely topic. I mean, Australia has been working very hard over the past, well, more than a decade to build out its trade links into the region. And you can see, if you look at our network of free trade agreements, that we have bilateral FTAs with most countries across the Indo-Pacific. And some of the earlier regional agreements were ones that we engaged in, including the Australia, New Zealand and ASEAN free trade agreement, for example. But as Sebastian alluded to, the newer plurilateral agreements with the CPTPP and RCEP are hugely exciting. And from our perspective, they're all extremely complementary. It's, part of Australia's approach to building market access for our businesses, our consumers as well. But it's more than that. It's providing diversification options for our businesses, making trade across the region more flexible, and in particular for the plurilaterals, enabling the kinds of regional supply chains that simply don't function as well with a system of bilateral agreements. And at the same time, building a really high standard of rules that will apply across the region to make trade more predictable, not just for our goods exporters, but also for our services and investors. So, it helps to have, for example, more flexible rules of origin that will enable those kinds of supply chains, but also to be setting really high standards in other areas that in particular are moving quickly, like digital trade, where it helps to kind of bring all kind of countries in the region up to a common standard. And in particular in the Indo-Pacific, it's important because it's such a significant region and a growing region. I mean, RCEP is 30% of the world's population, 59% of Australia's trade is with RCEP countries, and CPTPP has around 13% of the GDP of world GDP included in its membership, more with the UK's accession, as Sebastian mentioned. The UK is looking to exceed, and those negotiations are underway. So it's a particularly important issue for our region.
As Stephen mentioned there, Miyuki, CPTPP, big ambitions, many people holding out a lot of hope, but on a practical level, how would you say it's performing?
Thank you very much. As Stephen said, I think the CPTPP is very important for the region. And thanks to the CPTPP, the tariff is gradually decreasing, which widened the choice of possible supply chain among the member countries. And also, as others mentioned, the rule of origin is now totally standardized. And now we can accumulate the origin of all the membership countries. So it is driving more active trade in the Trans-Pacific region, I think. For Japan, the auto parts trade with Canada, for example, increased after CPTPP. And also, we are welcoming a lot of agriculture products, coming from Australia and New Zealand. So I think it is now showing clear results. And I think if the United States is coming back to TPP someday, and also the new membership, such as the United Kingdom and other Asian countries are joining, maybe the economic benefit will grow drastically in the future for this region. I'm waiting for that.
Many people waiting and hoping for that. Sebastian, I just want to talk about specific bilateral FTAs. The UK's already got 7 in place and working on 2 further ones with CPTPP partners. But just from this sector, from the automotive sector's point of view, are they a nice have, or are they more important than that? Are they integral?
I think going back to one of the points that Stephen said is the difference between plurilateral and bilateral agreements for the automotive supply chain. If you look at the automotive supply chain in Asia, you realize that there's specialization, right? Japan and China are focused on engineering. There's assembly countries like Thailand and Malaysia, and there's other countries that are coming up the supply chain like Vietnam, which means that most automotive manufacturers need to use resources from all those countries to be able to manufacture competitive vehicles. So, and the FTA does facilitate the supply chains in 2 ways. I think Miyuki mentioned the rule of origin. Often a lot of manufacturers in the region need to have separate production chains for different countries because they're using different bilateral agreements. Under the one same FTA, that means that as long as they meet the rule for one country, they can export to all countries. And the second one is it provides a common framework to address behind the border barriers. Right? If you talk to any automotive manufacturer in the region, they're going to say that the biggest barrier is not tariffs, but they're going to say standards, price control measures, taxation, homologation requirements. And a plurilateral really does provide an opportunity, like Stephen said, to bring some of the other countries up to those standards and ensure that there is a more common approach to some of the issues that are the most common barriers to automotive manufacturers within the region.
And Sebastian, during accession, thinking about what else might be positive impacts. I mean, is there scope to negotiate sort of side instruments or so-called carve-outs?
Yes, so I'm sure a lot of the people in the call are interested to understand whether there's a way to incorporate automotive things within the agreement. So the way the accession process works, existing agreements like existing countries within the agreement like Australia do not have to renegotiate, right? In a negotiation process, you'll be negotiating the UK's tariff schedules, services schedules, investment schedules, but the CPTPP does have side letter instruments that different countries have used to negotiate things bilaterally to defend particular interests or to either expand some of the commitments or to exclude some of the commitments within the agreement. So if there's specific things that matter for the UK automotive industry, I would suggest that they take a careful look at existing bilateral letters and figure out whether there's things that the agreement doesn't meet that they would like it to meet, that they would like to include in a side letter, with key markets within the agreement, whether it's Australia or Japan or Canada, like some of the existing countries have done so already.
Really interesting. Rohit, let's talk about India again. Within this environment of negotiations, explain to us where you think India's coming from, what you think India's attitude is towards this issue.
Like India is also at a very advanced stage of negotiating free trade agreement with the United Kingdom on TC, on other regional agreements. Of course, we have not moved for certain reasons that pertains to us. But for UK and India FTA, we have already announced the enhanced trade partnership that was announced on the 4th of May 2021. When both Prime Minister of India and UK have declared the roadmap 2030, which is going to guide us for next 10 years in our bilateral trade, economic, and all other aspects of the relationship. At the same time, we signed and declared the enhanced trade partnership. It is the first step towards the free trade agreement with United Kingdom. We are going to launch the negotiations soon by the end of this year, and most probably next year we will make significant progress in that. Our aim is to even conclude the FTA by the end of the next year if things are moving in the right direction. So I would say that India and UK have bilaterally worked very well and moved very fast on achieving this target of liberalizing trade barriers and providing more market access to each other. If you see in particular, though FTA will cover all the sectors, but in particular, if I have to briefly mention you about the India-UK in auto sector, you will notice that there are many UK companies which are already present in India in quite a sizable way, like JCB has a big presence which employs around 2,000 people in India. GKN Automotive, that also employs around 2,000 people, and then you have Jaguar Land Rover employing 300 to 500 people in India. Similarly, if you see from India to UK, again you have Tata Group, which is creating around 500 employments. Tech Mahindra is up to 1,000 employment in the UK, and Ashok Leyland is again about 500 employment generation in the UK, with of course sizable investment in terms of FDI, and also bringing technology and bringing a lot of trade between the two countries. So I see that both countries are moving and progressing very well in the right direction.
And Rohit, you mentioned some specific organisations, some specific multilaterals there, including Tata and so on, but just drilling right down into this sector, into the automotive sector, what do you see the potential there would be?
So potential for, if I'm speaking on India UK, the potential is like our companies have good synergy. Our export import also in the sector of trade and automobile is quite sizable, around $800 million of trade in this sector between the two countries, which is of course fluctuating with a few percentage points, but it has potential of growing upward, and the auto, especially like technology of UK, especially in the e-vehicle, battery, and our schemes to promote automotive industry in India will certainly kind of take us forward in having crossed the 1 billion plus trade in this sector.
Thank you. Miyuki, I want to concentrate again on Japan. Of course, we know that we have an agreement in place, UK-Japanese agreement in place. What do you think that means on a practical level as far as trade opportunities?
Thank you. I think in case of Nissan, we have major big plants in both Japan and the UK, and we are exporting key components from Japan to UK, and then exporting the complete vehicle from the UK to the EU market and other markets. So I think the continuation of the trade agreements among Japan, UK, and EU is crucial and indispensable to sustain our business. So we certainly appreciate all these trade agreements, and I hope to expand that kind of initiative for other regions too. And in addition to our Japanese plants, Nissan would like to make our UK factory an EV and battery hub, initially for European region and maybe in the future for other regions. And because electrification is the direction for the future, and I think battery is a very strategic components, for this purpose. So we are working hard to localize many key components of EV and battery in the UK, in order to, of course, satisfy the rule of origin. And so we would like many UK suppliers to join those initiatives to build up, future competitiveness, both for UK and for Japan.
Miyuki, just following on from that point, if there are UK businesses watching us this morning who are thinking about trade with Japan, is that the area that you would encourage them to concentrate on? So really any advice for those organisations maybe thinking about dipping their toe into that water?
Well, to be honest, to find the right supplier for the electrification parts, that is pretty difficult, because all the auto industries are sort of so much used to ICE vehicles, and EV and battery needs a totally different technology, and maybe there are some opportunities not for traditional auto suppliers, but some other related, more expanded industry will have a new opportunity to work with auto industry. So if you're interested, please contact us. And we would like to discuss, and because we also have FTAs, that's really, helpful. And we also would like to bring more Japanese supplier to the UK, and maybe if UK companies have competitiveness, of course, we would like to increase the localization ratio. So UK suppliers from various industries are always welcome.
Well, that's good advice. It certainly sounds like a seller's market, if you like, rather than a buyer's market. And just finally, Miyuki, from the other side, so for Japanese companies looking to invest in the UK, I mean, obviously Nissan, but other Japanese companies that you see, what's the appetite there, would you say?
To be honest with you, we had a little bit of concern at the time of Brexit, the no deal and everything. But now the deal is made perfectly. And I think the UK government is, running the departure from the EU smoothly, at least for automotive sector. So we now see the sustainability in a business. And that's why I think more and more countries are looking at the Europe, because the European region, including UK, is pretty much advanced in carbon neutral sustainability issues. So if we are doing good in European area, that means we will be doing good in other part of the region. UK and other European countries are heading for the future direction. So more and more countries are focusing on this region so that we can sort of test our marketability and competitiveness in the region. So it's a very good sort of training opportunity for Japanese companies, I think.
That's interesting. Miyuki, thank you so much. Stephen, I want to come back to the Australian FTA. Obviously, we had announcements over the summer. Can you tell us how near we are to a deal?
Thanks. I mean, as you noted, we did have some important announcements over the summer. So after launching the negotiations in June of last year, we announced agreement in principle on the FTA in June this year when Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison was in the UK. In terms of how, in timelines for the deal, I mean, ideally we'll have the agreement finalised and enforced by the middle of next year. That's the goal. And in terms of the exact content of the deal, it will depend on the. I can go into some of the details, extrapolate on the agreement in principle, but we'll have to wait to see the full text to find out the details.
And Stephen, what do you think the main benefits would be for this industry, for the automotive industry?
Sure. I mean, from the agreement in principle, it had some details in there that point to some clear benefits, I think, for the automotive industry. I mean, of course, the most obvious one is elimination of tariffs broadly through the agreement, and as well trade facilitative rules of origin. I think there's a particular line in the agreement of principle that confirms the product-specific rules. There'll be product-specific rules that will enable UK automotive exports, including regional value content rule of 25% for cars. So I think that's something that's quite significant for the automotive sector. I'd also point to kind of the broader ecosystem that the FTA will create that will benefit not just autos but other industries as well. We are such close bilateral trading partners. Australia is the UK is Australia's 5th largest trading partner, 3rd largest in services, 2nd largest in investment partner. And a number of aspects of the FTA will benefit the ability of UK firms to operate in Australia and vice versa. In particular, things like more ambitious mobility arrangements for our citizens, nationals, to be able to work, live and work in each other's countries, pathways for improved mutual recognition of professional qualifications, in particular, for example, for engineers, would be potentially useful for the automotive sector. And of course, on the investment side as well, improved access for investors into the Australian market through higher screening thresholds for our foreign investment screening regime. So all of these kinds of different aspects, while they might not be specifically directed to the automotive sector, just really improve the ease of doing business for both exporters from the UK and also automotive firms that look to establish operations or draw talent in Australia or from Australia.
Thank you so much. We're going to have a couple more questions from me for our panel, and then I'm going to open up 2 questions. I've already seen that thank you so much. You've been sending questions through, so I'll start putting your questions to our panel in just a couple of minutes. So if you've got something on the tip of your tongue, send it through to me and I'll put it to our 4 panellists. Let's go back to CPTPP. Sebastian, we've talked about the UK's accession to the group. What about other countries that may or may not join that gang?
Correct. And understanding this might be a sensitive topic because of the countries that have shown interest. I think I just want to preface my comments by explaining why join an agreement like the CPTPP. So, as I mentioned before, the idea of this is that it promotes consistency and lowers barriers to trade within existing trade relationships. That means that if there is any strong economic interest, it's in the interest of members within an agreement to bring other people on board and raise the standards and lower barriers to trade. So, regardless of who the member is, it's in the interest of members themselves to have as many people join, because that would mean that the automotive supply chain can be better integrated and that the common barriers to trade to automotive sector will be lower across all members. So the larger, the better. So with that said, who will join? I think first, I'd just like to highlight that not all original members of the CPTPP have actually ratified the agreement. So Brunei, Chile, and Malaysia remain outside of the agreement, even though they've negotiated it. So as of now, they're not part of the agreement. So that would be the top 3. The second one is countries that have already applied for accession. So that first one is the UK, as I've already mentioned. And 2 other countries have recently applied for accession, both of which include China and Taiwan, which is complicated for geopolitical reasons. So I just want to very quickly focus on the case of China. A lot of the people have said that the standards of the agreement, which I've highlighted, are very high, might be difficult for China to meet. But China has shown a strong political commitment to actually meet those requirements. They've been preparing for it. And I believe that it's not going to be easy, but I think China could get itself organized to meet, high labor requirements, intended state-owned enterprises requirements, intellectual property requirements within the agreement, and it will join. And then the last group is countries that have not shown sort of interest in accession, but that I think next on the list, and that would include countries like Korea and like Thailand, which if I'm an automotive manufacturer, I'm hoping that they would join, right? Because if you think of an agreement that includes hubs like Thailand, Korea, Japan, China, the UK, and countries like Australia and New Zealand, that could really, really eliminate key barriers to trade for the automotive sector in the region. And that it's something that I think everybody should start paying attention to.
Really interesting. Thank you. Last question to Stephen before I'm going to bring in some audience questions. And then we might have some time for some final thoughts before we wrap up. Stephen, the UK, we know, is in negotiations to join CPTPP. We've covered that extensively. But just tell me what Australia's role is in that procession process. What's its attitude and what influence does it have?
Thanks, Cassie. Yeah, I mean, Australia is hugely supportive of the UK's bid to join the CPTPP. We've welcomed their interest ever since they expressed it, and have been working with them as other CPTPP parties have. I mean, in terms of the process for UK accession, the first step was the consensus decision by the CPTPP Commission to commence the accession process with the UK on the 2nd of June. And CPTPP parties then set up a working group through which the UK has begun to demonstrate its efforts to align its domestic laws and regulations to comply with the CPTPP obligations in accordance with the expectations set out by the CPTPP Commission. So Australia is playing a very active role in those discussions, as it would be doing for all future accessions. It's something that Australia will be working with the CPTPP membership to consider and negotiate. The one point I would flag, in addition to those kind of general process issues, is the note in our agreement in principle in June that for market access for goods, the outcome of our bilateral FTA should suffice to not require a separate bilateral market access negotiation for goods in the CPTPP context. So there's been some discussion in that space already. But we are working with the UK, as are all CPTPP countries, to progress that accession.
Well, that's very interesting to hear. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to go to the first question from the audience. This is from Robert O'Neill Welsh, Automotive Forum. Robert's question says, a myriad of headwinds have challenged global supply chains. Well, they sure have. Will current power outages, asks Robert, in China and India further expose and disrupt supply chains? So Robert specifically talked about Indian power outages. So let's ask Rohit how you think these power issues might affect supply chains. Rohit.
That's, certainly a concern if you think from that point of view. But see, India and China, in a way, both are major economies. And especially if I talk of India, we are promoting more production, investment, and innovation in the automotive sector. And we are committed to the stable tax regime, stable and rules-based environment for all the businesses. I'm sure that this will not affect Indian supply chain, Indian industry, and Indian commitment to having more FDI and more collaboration in this automotive sector, among others. So I do not see from Indian side having any impact. And so I safely presume that so would be other countries as well. So it was certainly COVID which has affected the supply chain. It might be certain other geopolitical issues, but we are committed to maintaining the continuity in trade and investment and other aspects of the relationship.
Rohit, thank you. Sebastian, I think I saw you nodding there.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about the resilience of supply chains within the region and the risk associated with it. And I think something that we've seen, not just in the automotive sector, but in all sectors during the crisis, is that there seems to be a lack of a common framework to be able to address these issues head on, right? So if there's an outage, if there's an export control, where do I go? Is the WTO the best forum to do that? And I just wanted to highlight that's another reason to join agreements like the CPTPP, because it provides you with a common framework and forum to address issues that involve more than two countries, right? So if there's a bilateral power outage, you can address that bilaterally. But if you're talking about automotive, where you're talking about suppliers and manufacturing hubs across multiple countries, the CPTPP and other types of regional mechanisms actually allow you to address that collectively so that you can protect the resilience of the supply chain as a whole, and not just the nexus between two suppliers bilaterally.
We've got a question from Drew Collins from Eurotech. And Drew says, trade agreements and increased global trade are always welcome, but the growth and access is meaningless, says Drew, without some control over shipping costs and conditions. And Drew asks, could the panel comment on how they view the future of shipping and logistics, which have been runaway for the past 15 to 18 months? Miyuki.
sorry. You're asking about the importance of shipment.
Cost of shipping, and basically Drew was saying all these agreements are great, but the practicalities of the increase in shipping costs almost make them pointless.
Yeah, you're right. For example, I wonder if we have a wonderful factory in the UK, but I wonder if Nissan want to make a decision about bringing our UK vehicle to, for example, to Korea, for example, but it's much cheaper to send it from Japan, so certainly the shipment is a big factor. And also, especially in the future, when we think about the carbon neutral life cycle assessment kind of things, then the shipment takes a big part of the CO2, emission. So that kind of factor also needs to be considered for global logistics, I think.
Definitely. Well, I'm so delighted that we've got lots of questions. I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to be quite specific. There's a question here about, it's an anonymous question. Traditionally, the UK's exports to Asian markets have primarily been luxury and specialist vehicles. Is there space, asks this questioner, for it to become a volume exporter to Asia? So that makes sense to go to Sebastian. Can we move away from the luxury and go into volume, do you think?
I think it's definitely possible, but you need to think about shifting your supply chains, because I think barriers to completely build vehicles in Asia are quite high. Taxes are quite high. So the only way to successfully move into volume is to localize and manufacture, or at least assemble your cars in that space. So I think if you do want to increase trade volumes between the UK and Asia, maybe it's on vehicle parts or assembly parts, and then use some of the key manufacturing hubs within Asia to develop those vehicles. And if the UK is in fact a member of the CPTPP, and countries like China and Thailand do in fact join, then all of a sudden you have opened up the entire market where you can export parts from the UK into a manufacturing hub in Vietnam or Thailand, and then you can export to all other CPTPP members at low tariffs. So I think it's not just about exporting, but about trying to understand how to minimize some of the logistics and transportation costs that were mentioned in the previous question.
Brilliant. Thank you. Stephen, I'm going to put the last question to you. This is, how significant, asked the questioner, will the UK's electric vehicle capability be for Australia? With Australia looking to tap into UK expertise to deliver a transition to zero-emission vehicles, what extent might the FTA facilitate that? So the electric vehicle capabilities, Stephen.
Thanks. It's a really interesting question, and absolutely, there's a lot of potential in this space. Facilitated by the FTA, absolutely, and for all those reasons I mentioned before about the FTA facilitating a better ecosystem for our firms to operate, and particularly in kind of innovative and new technologies. We are also, quite focused from the Australian perspective on playing our part and engaging closely in parts of the supply chain where we have a comparative advantage, and that's in the critical minerals and rare earth space, where we see a lot of potential through partnerships with other countries, including the UK, to make sure that we are, providing a steady and stable supply of the resources that are needed, in particular, of course, lithium, to support battery production and electrification processes, so we can feed into the supply chain at that end. And then on the, I suppose, the more research and development side, I mean, we're both very highly skilled, technically sophisticated workforces, and there's a lot of collaboration already happening in that space, which the FTA can only make easier and better.
And as you told us here, hopefully that FTA will be wrapped up with a bow around it in just the next few months. So I'm afraid the time now is 9:55, which is our scheduled end for this panel. So no more time. Thank you to you for asking so many interesting questions of our panel. And of course, a very big thank you to our panel for their contributions this morning. I think we really did cover a lot of ground, so I'm very grateful to them.